Do you know what your indoor air quality is? The EPA estimates that we spend 87% of our lives indoor. Due to current circumstances, a lot of that time is going to be spent inside our own houses because we're all working from home now. And that's a trend that I think is going to continue for a long time. Let's take a look at what makes up our actual indoor air quality. So we are going to go over things today like radon, VOCs, mold, carbon dioxide, particulate matter, and carbon monoxide. These are all the things that we're breathing in our houses, especially in the wintertime, now that all the doors and windows, everything is completely closed. These are the things that are getting into our lungs. So I'm going to take you guys through all of this stuff that I've learned over the past couple of years. And a lot of the information that I've gathered here today, and I'll have all the sources, is either through the WHO, the World Health Organization, or the EPA. So we're going to go over every one of those indoor air pollutants that we just talked about. But you're probably wondering, how do I test or how do I detect if I actually have these in my house and if it's a problem? These are the couple of the products that I've been using over the last couple of years. By no means am I sponsored by any of these companies. I don't do sponsorships on this channel. It's just what I'm comfortable talking about. So there's really two devices that I use here. One is by IQAir. This is a PM 2.5 detector or particulate matter detector. Again, this is by IQAir. There's going to be a link to this in the description of my video. You can go out and buy it. And then I also have these things over here from AirThings, and this does VOCs, this does radon, this pretty much does the rest of everything that we're going to talk about here. And then there's a little companion product that you can place in other locations to do things like VOC detection. And these are typically sold in a set. You could also just get this one by itself. There's a review video that I'm doing about these, so if you're curious about these and want to get more information, check out that review video. So with that, let's start off with probably the most dangerous one on this list, radon. Radon is an odorless gas that comes up through the soil and into our basements. It's actually from the decay of uranium inside of rocks. Now, a lot of rocks have uranium inside of them. One of the prime examples that everyone always talks about is granite. I remember 20 years ago, people were worried about, oh, I have granite countertops. Is there going to be radon coming into my house off of these things? And you don't have to worry about it. It's in such low concentrations inside of granite on a piece of slab that it's really not going to do anything. It's really once these things get concentrated underground and start seeping up through the soil that you have to worry about it. Now, you may be thinking that you just bought this new house 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and when you bought it, you remember that your inspector did a radon test. Now, the problem with those tests that they do is they're very short-term tests. Generally, they only do 48-hour tests. And when most people move or they buy a new house, it's generally springtime, summertime, maybe fall. Not a lot of people move in the wintertime. And unfortunately, when radon gets the highest concentration is always during the wintertime. And that's because of something called the stack effect. So if you take a look at this drawing that's on the page here, you can see all the places that radon comes in. And generally it comes in again through the basement. Any cracks in the slab, cracks in the wall, your sump pump, it comes up through that. And in some rare occasions, it can come through water as well if you're fed from a well system that happens to have radon in the water. It can come through your shower heads, your faucets when you open them up. So back to the stack effect, and this is where things get interesting, and this is why we usually see a much higher percentage of radon in the winter months and the cold season versus in the summer. And the big reason for that is in the wintertime, everything is closed up nice and tight. We don't open our windows a lot, everything is shut. And what happens is there's a pressure difference between the outside of my house and the inside of my house because the inside is a lot warmer and the outside is a lot colder. So what happens is because of that pressure difference, we start to have what's called a stack effect, like a chimney, where gas is actually pulled through your concrete slab and rises through the house and vents out toward the top of the house. Now you might be thinking, how does it get through concrete? Believe it or not, concrete is actually semi-porous, so gas will come through that. So once there's like the polar vortex comes through and it gets really cold, you'll see those spikes where they start to shoot up that you see, the radon level got a lot higher. And this is why those 48-hour tests never really give you the full picture, because in the wintertime, things spike, in the summertime, things go down. So when you took your measurement, if you were close to 4, you'd probably want to look at a longer term picture, maybe 3 months, and see what it does around those 3 months and then take the average. And if it's still around 4, maybe you need to run it a little bit longer. Or if you're really worried about it, I would say contact a radon mitigation person to see what they say, and they can give you other ideas for testing. I'll add here too that a lot of times with new building, you don't actually test for radon. It's not mandatory that you get that test when you're building a new house. So if you built your house, you may have never actually gotten a radon test. And like I said before, a lot of times these newer houses are a lot tighter than the older houses were, so you can actually see a higher percentage of radon in a newer house versus an older house. Let's talk about how radon actually gets measured. It's measured in something called picocuries per liter. And when you're walking around outside, the general background level of radon is about 0.4 picocuries per liter. Now, where is the breaking point where, okay, what's dangerous versus not dangerous? If you listen to the EPA, the general guidance is around 4 picocuries per liter. Anything over that, you should start to look at some sort of radon mitigation system. Now, that's something that's kind of up for debate as well, because supposedly radon, very dangerous stuff, no level of it is safe. So I've seen other areas where they're looking at moving that number down to 2.7. I've seen examples for, but generally speaking, 4 is kind of that, hey, we really need to worry about it. And the statistics that the EPA puts on their website around this, as you can see on this page here, it shows that, hey, if I have 20 picocuries per liter, that's about 250 times more dangerous than drowning. And it goes down from there. But you can see sometimes these numbers, guys, these numbers can be 100, 150, 200, and which can be very dangerous because this is ionizing radiation that's coming in from the gas. So if you do have high levels of radon in your house, it's something you're definitely going to want to address. And me doing my research and all of this stuff, this is probably the most dangerous thing that people should be worried about inside of their house. To give everybody a quick idea of where the more dangerous areas are around the country, you can see here, this is again straight off the EPA website, but anywhere in red, there's a very high probability that you're going to have radon levels above 4. Anywhere in yellow, lower probability, orange, somewhere in the middle there. There's the link at the bottom here. You guys can check this out. You can click on some of these little dots and you can investigate it further. Next up are VOCs. This stands for volatile organic compounds, and they are everywhere. They're in the sofa that you have. They're in the carpet that's on the floor. They're in your favorite beanbag chair. They're in your stove. They're there when you're cooking. And what happens with these products is something called off-gassing. So if you have a brand new floor and you just put that in, it's going to off-gas a lot in the beginning. And then slowly and gradually, it's going to decrease off-gassing after a while. Same thing goes with construction, plywood, anything that there's glue, that's also going to have a certain amount of off-gassing. And here are this kind of the main categories of the different types of VOCs that are out there. And some of them, they're really not going to be harmful, like orange oil. Unless you have a sensitivity to some of these things, you're probably fine. Others, like formaldehyde, those are the ones that you really have to be worried about because, again, those can be dangerous to your health. So the way that most consumer-grade VOC detectors out there work is they sense something called TVOCs or total VOCs. And basically that's just all VOCs that are in the environment, and it's giving you a reading in parts per billion. It's not going to break it down into the individual components. So if you're really worried about formaldehyde, you might want to go out and buy a formaldehyde detector. But this will give you a generally good idea of what's the quality of the air, what's your VOC quality like based off these numbers. This is from AirThings.com. That's that detector I showed you in the beginning here. And basically, they have a scale set up. If you're at 0 parts per billion to 250 parts per billion, then VOC contents in your area are low. There's probably not a lot to worry about. If somehow you're over 2,000 parts per billion, or in that 250 to 2,000 range, that's where you may want to start to investigate what's going on. A lot of times, guys, use your nose. You can smell what these VOCs are. When you walk into a brand new built house, you can smell that new house smell or that new car smell. Those are VOCs. That's from the off-gassing and all the building materials that are out there. So by removing some of those sources that have that smell to them, you can get these numbers start to going lower. And then if you're still worried about it, that's where you may want to either call a professional or you can start to look at some of these individual sources like formaldehyde. Mold. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. It's generally going to be found in dark areas because UV light kills a lot of molds out there. it generally affects people with allergies and asthma. There is the dreaded black mold out there that a lot of people are always worried about. If you do have mold and you want to get it tested, you're going to have someone come over, scrape a little bit off, and look at it under a microscope. Now, mold needs a few things to grow. Number one, it needs moisture, some source of water to help it grow. And that could be from a burst pipe, that could be from your house being too humid, that could be from a leaky roof. The next thing that needs is some sort of food source. And I'm not talking about a leftover piece of bread. Yes, that will get moldy as well. But really, it can be anything. It could be an underside of a carpet. It could be a piece of wood that you have, the OSB board. Mold doesn't need a lot to grow. The next thing it needs is oxygen. If it's completely starved off from oxygen, it won't grow. And then the last thing it needs is a warmer environment. Mold generally does not grow in the wintertime because it is too cold outside. It can still grow inside because obviously you heat your house. Inside your house, obviously you're going to want to remove any sources of water. So if a pipe did break, make sure you get that cleaned up really well so you don't get mold that actually forms. But the big issue here is usually moisture and humidity. So if you take a look at this chart that I have here, and these are two tables that I follow a lot, generally for it to be comfortable for people, you want to be in that 30 to 60% humidity range. Really the ideal is probably around 45-ish. You can see right in the middle there. Where you start to see issues around mold is once you get into the higher humidity there, around 60%, that's when mold starts to form because mold likes moisture and it's pulling that moisture right out of the air. That's great for summertime and everything, but a lot of times in the winter, we can't actually go to all the way up to 60%. Sometimes we can't even go to 40%. If it's 10 degrees outside, your humidity inside should only be about 30%. And that's because we don't want the water to be able to condensate on, again, the outside of the building. If you don't have a vapor barrier or your vapor barrier is torn a little bit, we want to make sure we stop that. And that's when we start to lower the humidity inside of our houses. You'll probably notice this if your humidity inside your house is high. You'll see condensation occurring on your windows. That's a good indication that your humidity inside your house may be too high. If it's condensating on a window and it's really, really bad, there's a decent chance that it could be condensating inside your walls. If you're getting a little bit on your window, you're probably fine. Again, you'd have drywall in the front of it. You should have a vapor barrier and everything stopping some of that water back there. But if your windows get really bad, you can probably see this. You can also get a little thermometer gauge that shows the humidity and the temperature on it. And I will say there really isn't a good test to see if you have mold in your environment. The only way that you're going to be able to really tell if you have mold is if you see it and you actually get a sample. There are air detection kits out there. There's a lot of controversy on how well those things work. So number one, you can use your nose. If you smell musty smell or mold, take a look, pull back some insulation if you have to, take a look to see if you have mold. And then if you really want to see what kind of mold it is it the bad stuff? Is it, not so bad stuff? You can get it tested. PM or particulate matter. Now this is all the particles that are flying around in the air. This could be from cooking fumes, this could be from dust, this could be from smoke if your neighbor's burning a campfire and it's coming in through your windows, this could be from car exhaust, it could be from sea salt even. It's all the stuff that's coming up and basically the particles that are floating in the air. Particulate matter is measured in two different ways. So you have PM10, which is anything smaller than 10 microns, and then you have PM 2.5, which is anything smaller than 2.5 microns. So PM10 is things that are going to be a little bit bigger, like dust, sea salt, pollen in the air. And then the 2.5, PM 2.5 is going to be things like gasoline combustion, wood combustion, cooking fumes, things like that. Now the ones that you should be more worried about on this is the PM 2.5. And the IQAir that I was showing in the beginning, that really measures PM 2.5. Not to say that PM10 is not bad. You definitely want to take care of that as well or take a look at it. But PM 2.5 is the more dangerous one. And that's why when all those wildfires were going on out west, they said stay inside your house because there was a lot of particulate matter that was going in the air, and that's stuff that's not good for a cardiovascular, especially for older people or if you have issues. Again, you want to stay in your house when that stuff's going on. Now, there are actually standards out there for measuring this stuff and what your exposure limit should be. So I've got two of them on the page here, you guys can take a look at the National Ambient Air Quality Standard and then the California Ambient Air Quality Standard. California being California, their standards are a little bit more strict than the rest of the country here. So again, if you want to measure this, this is where I use that IQAir product to do so. And again, the link will be in the description for it. CO2 or carbon dioxide. Now this is a gas that's obviously all around us. When we exhale, we breathe out CO2. The more people we have in a room, the more CO2 there is. And why this is important is because it gives us a good idea of how the ventilation is in a particular area. So if I have a lot of people over and we're all breathing out CO2 and the CO2 level is low, that means that I've got really good ventilation. If the CO2's rising, that means the ventilation in that room isn't as good as it should be. We need more air changes per hour is the technical term for it. Now, ventilation is obviously good for a lot of things, but what it's really good at is diluting things like viruses and pathogens in the air. So if I dilute those things, there's a less likelihood that I'm actually going to get sick from somebody else in that room being sick. And the EPA even looked at this, and it's called sick building syndrome. I'm not going to go into it, but if you're curious on it, I'll post a link to it in the description of the video. Again, here are some recommendations as far as the parts per million level of CO2 in the environment. So if you're between 400 and 1,000, you have decent ventilation, nothing to worry about. If you're between 1,000 and 1,500, that's really when you should be thinking, okay, how do I ventilate this space a little bit better? Maybe open a window. And then if you're above 2,000, that's kind of the critical level. That's where things like increased heart rate, difficulty breathing can start to occur is when you're above that 2,000 parts per million level. Again, the AirThings sensor that I have that I talked about in the beginning, that will detect this as well as the IQAir sensor. Both of those sensors actually go ahead and detect this. So this is the one that I actually saved for last because I figured that most people have probably heard of this, and this is carbon monoxide. So where does it come from? The most probably widely known one is vehicle exhaust. If you have a attached garage and the car is running and the garage doors are closed, there's a really good chance you're going to get carbon monoxide buildup inside your garage and also inside your house. So you definitely need to watch out for that one. The other one that people have probably heard of before is appliances like furnaces, gas furnaces, combustion furnaces that are not working properly, and they could be backdrafting. So that means that the gases that they're creating are actually coming in and filtering through the house. Hopefully everybody knows already how dangerous carbon monoxide is. At low levels, it can cause you to be tired. At high levels, it can actually be fatal. And it's something that can happen very quick. It's not like VOCs or Radon that, hey, over 15, 20, 30, 40 years, something might happen. This is something that if carbon monoxide builds up, it is extremely, extremely dangerous. Like I said before, most people already have this detector inside their house. It starts to alarm once the levels start to approach a certain level. So there you have it. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two on how to improve your indoor air quality. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, please post them in the comment section below, and I will get back to you. Thanks a lot.